Okay, so in a previous video, I've discussed sort of the various multifaceted lies that the Vote Leave campaign told around the £350 million to the NHS. And obviously there's a very strong case to say that without that, they wouldn't have won the referendum campaign. But there's an equally strong technical case to say that that's all irrelevant, because the referendum itself was irrelevant. The referendum itself did not cause Brexit. And in a legal sense, that is correct. So there was a court case, I think it was a High Court case in December 2018, where a group of petitioners were arguing that given that all the things that the Electoral Commission found out about the Vote Leave campaign and Vote Leave being fined and so on, they argued that the referendum result should be annulled. Now, the government actually had a very simple and actually very strong case, and for what it's worth, I agree with them reluctantly. And their case was basically around the fact that it was an advisory referendum. Now, a lot of people talk about that, but they don't necessarily talk about what it means. So we've had various referendums in this country on joining the EU, leaving the EU. We've had various referendums from Scotland and Wales and so on, and one on AV. And the one on the AV was the odd one out, because as far as I'm aware, that was the only one that was non-advisory. So what we mean by that is usually when we have a referendum, Parliament passes a law that says there will be a referendum on such a question, or the question to be determined by the Electoral Commission, and the referendum will be run by the Electoral Commission under UK electoral law. And what that means is, if you cheat, you can go to prison. And that's it. Other than that, it's just an opinion poll. It's an opinion poll run under election law. It has no binding result whatsoever. Now, the 2011 referendum on changing the vote from the voting system for general elections from first past the post to alternative votes, that was the price, or one of the part of the price that the Lib Dems extracted for the Conservatives in order to go into coalition with them in 2010. Now you might say, well, weren't the Lib Dems scared that if they had won that referendum, and spoiler, they didn't, weren't they scared the Conservatives just turned around and then refused to pass the law that actually changed the voting system? And the answer was no, because it was a non-advisory referendum, it was binding. So essentially Parliament passed a law that said the voting system for general elections will change from first past the post to alternate votes, but only if ratified by referendum. So if the referendum result had been yes, that would have automatically flicked this pre-passed legal switch, and the voting system would immediately, from that day forward, for general elections, be alternate votes. But let's say they had won, the yes to AV side did win the election, the referendum, sorry. But then it turns out they cheated. And someone went to court, did a judicial review and said that the result should be annulled because they cheated. In that case, if the court had annulled the result, that would have automatically flipped the legal switch back, so that our voting system would now be back to first past the post. Brexit had no such mechanism. It was just a giant opinion poll, the 2016 referendum. Now, in the autumn of 2016, Gina Miller went to court and argued convincingly that the UK Prime Minister had no authority to trigger Article 50. The reason because doing so would essentially result in, although Prime Ministers have the right to exercise treaty privileges, doing so would break the 1972 European Communities Act. It'd be like a boat at mooring, ripping out, leaving all the, while still connected to its mooring points. And the executive is not allowed to undo acts of Parliament, essentially. Now, a foresighted person, if someone had foresight, they would have included the power to trigger Article 50 in the referendum bill. But it's a good job they didn't. Let's think about what happened. So, the court has ruled that the Prime Minister has no authority to trigger Article 50. So in 2016, Parliament passed a law that said, in autumn 2016, Parliament passed a law that said the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has the authority to trigger Article 50 at a time of their choosing. And in March 2017, Theresa May exercised those powers. When the court case came in December 2018, the government's position was, it doesn't matter whether the referendum was cheated. The referendum is irrelevant. The chain of events was, in autumn 2016, Parliament gave the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom the legal authority to trigger Article 50 at the time of their choosing, and in March 2017, Theresa May exercised that authority, and the court agreed with them, which is true. So the court's case was, there is nothing to annul. It was an advisory referendum. Now, which for what it's worth, I agree with. Now what's very interesting is if someone had realised in advance of the referendum that it wasn't legal to trigger Article 50, they might have occurred to them to put a thing in the original referendum bill that says the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom shall have the authority to trigger Article 50, but only if this is ratified at a referendum by a yes vote. They might also have said something like a time limit, like if we vote yes, the Prime Minister has to trigger Article 50 within a year, or something like that. But it's a good job for the Brexiteers they didn't, because if they had have done that, then in December 2018, the court might have ruled we're going to annul the result. Therefore, it turns out the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom did not have the power to trigger Article 50 in March 2017, which would have the effect of then annulling Article 50, because if you look at Article 50 itself, it says something like subject to the lawful provisions of the country's own rules. So it's a very good job for the Brexiteers that the referendum was non-binding, because it meant it didn't matter if they cheated. Of course, you could argue it's incredibly hypocritical of a government to repeatedly claim a moral mandate based on the referendum, except for this one case where it suits them to say it was nothing to do with the referendum, Parliament gave us the power to leave, and we left. But, yeah, that's another story. But that's why technically the referendum was completely irrelevant and doesn't matter.